Hello, I'm Mantastic and Fantastic, and today I'm going to be talking about whether or not Miru was a bad idea and what my hopes are for the next farmable monster. So, Miru has been live in North America and EU for many months, and it, to a certain extent really took the pad meta by storm. She was not only the most powerful farmable monster released to date from a leadership perspective, she was also capable of basically clearing all endgame content and basically for the next several months any dungeon that was released, due to the fact that she had, at least at her release, 4 times health, 4 times recovery, and 49 times attack when you had the heart cross. This attack was later buffed to 59 times, and in all honesty, how do you really compete when cards like, say, Lucifer, who was strong, is only 1.8 times health recovery and 16 times attack? Miru is 3 times more damage and over double the amount of survivability. So basically, leaders just could not compete because Miru was essentially more powerful in terms of offense and defensive capabilities. So, while Miru is often regarded as a blessing for many pad players, she also has been met with harsh criticism because it did somewhat invalidate all of many players, say endgame teams that are, say, well polished or developed or invested in overnight, just because of the fact that she was so powerful. And obviously, you have to come to expect that power creep will obviously creep in from time to time and make teams that you had were strong, say, a year ago be less valuable moving forward. That is the way of basically any long-lasting game. However, if power creep jumps by long jump hurdling distances instead of manageable steps, that is a problem. So what I hope to achieve with this video is basically review Miru's history, how she came to power, how the Heart Cross meta is obviously dominating, where does Miru lie right now currently, and as well as what my hopes are for farmable monsters in the future. So, Miru's debut. So, prior to Miru's release, Heart Crosses did exist. However, they were significantly weaker than their current form because A, we did not actually have strong leaders with high multipliers that could actually fully benefit and utilize them, and B, their Heart Cross did not carry over on a sweep. So that means if you kill the floor, you actually don't have a shield up to tank a preemptive or kill a floor that does not actually have any sort of preemptive ability. Now, obviously we do have those benefits now, but at the time, it didn't really exist. And when Miru was released, or that time frame or so, things changed. And Miru, Kaede, and Sumire all kind of quickly jumped to the top of the meta because they had basically 4 times health and recovery along with a high damaging multiplier. So this trio of leaders essentially was able to basically deal spectacular damage and survive pretty much any attack in the game that was not something that was truly outrageous. And this is great, we have a new meta. But I guess unfortunately for Sumire, she kind of quickly fell off the train very fast, mostly because she requires A, a Heart Cross, and B, a 5 or 1 enhance to deal damage. Now, that is 2 completely different requirements that take up awkward amounts of space. And when you combine the two, it's a frustrating experience, as well as the fact that it became actually somewhat challenging to hit very high spike damage because your team really just stacked orb enhances, and you have lower combo count as well as the inability to really utilize Rose or TPA as efficiently. So now that trio has become a duo, and Kaede has a very horribly REM reliant roster for subs, most notably the fact that you require duplicates of herself, usually 2, in order to have a functional team. So that means you have to have, say, 3 6-star Godfest exclusives plus 2 other subs in order to make the more optimal functional team. And that's a very challenging thing for the average player. For myself, I have 0 on Mantastic and only 1 on Fantastic. And even if I pulled that Kaede when Kaede was very strong, I don't think I could have really formed a strong and capable team because, again, you're quite restrictive in what types of subs you are allowed to use. So it just made her challenging, and only a few lucky individuals were actually really able to use Kaede to her maximum potential. So, as such, now we're left with Miru, and Miru just basically became the go-to girl because not only is she farmable, but she has very flexible and gentle team building requirements. You can essentially use any light sub, and you can easily make a TPA or a row team, whatever was most suitable for your box. So, in essence, everyone was able to actually utilize Miru because in theory it is farmable. So, Miru's popularity. So, basically taking into account that Miru is very powerful and farmable, it's not really surprising that she became one of the most popular leaders in PAD because, like I said, everyone can beat her dungeon, get the drop, invest, level her up, and give her some love. Now, obviously it takes a little bit of time and dedication, but it is feasible. It's a good thing to do. Like, it's something to do with your stamina. And you at least, provided you have modest support, light cards, you can make a very functional team. It doesn't have to be perfect or optimal. It just functions so well because of the fact that she's bind immune, has high output, as well as great durability. So I feel that it's very important to have an end game goal in PAD because when you're starting out or you're mid game, you want to have something to pursue, and Miru fit that niche. It gave you access, basically helped open the door to end game content because you could beat Miru's dungeon, which was challenging, acquire the drop, and then start building a team. But then, unfortunately, I guess, because there's only one powerful monster to acquire, everyone had her, everyone used her. So then it became an issue of Miru and buttons. That was basically how the game shifted for a period of time because people would use Miru for endgame content and then Awoken Lubei or other button-style teams for more manageable dungeons. So that's a little surprising taking into consideration that PAD is a massive game and that there are thousands of monsters available and we're really just using 2 leaders. So there's maybe some burnout as well, which I'm going to talk about in the decline of Miru. But if you want to read a bit more about how the Heart Cross rose in popularity as well as their decline, you can read about it here. But the decline of Miru. So obviously Miru, actually with any game that's long lasting, there is going to be ebb and flow in terms of what's powerful and viable. So if a leader is able to stay at the top of the tier charts for several months, that's quite fantastic because there always will be cards cycling in and out because that's what keeps the game interesting and the meta shifting and moving forward. And this is not to say Miru is weaker by any means. She's actually just as strong, if not more powerful, with newer cards being released. But the fact that she's on the decline of popularity is mostly because that she cannot feasibly deal with combo shields very well, and she has an orb-hungry nature which dramatically increases your clear times, and that is a problem because who wants to spend more time clearing a dungeon? So the Heart Cross is a naturally orb-hungry and cumbersome mechanic to form. You need 5 heart orbs, and you also need damaging orbs, so light orbs in this case. And if you're the row-based Miru, that means you require 6 light orbs as well as 5 heart orbs. Now think of the spacing. You have a row at the top, row at the bottom, and a heart cross on the side in the middle. Now, this is taking up a lot of space, and it becomes quite challenging to hit 6 combos. You may not even have a 6 comboable board, and if you're forced to hit 7 or 8 combos, you have to pray to Skyfalls or RNGs for that to happen. And that is a downside because now if you want to overcome these combo shields, you have to use an active skill. So that puts a little damper on her viability because every time you use an active skill when you may not need to, it lowers your chances of clearing later on in the dungeon. So obviously combo shields are a problem for any Heart Cross leader, but especially when she becomes row-oriented, which was the more common and easy to build team. So, in addition to those combo shields, you also have to manage 2 different resources. You have hearts and light orbs. And it's going to be very hard, like I said, you need those 6 light orbs to kill most content, as well as the 5 hearts. And even if you clear the whole board, it's quite unlikely you're going to refresh perfectly and have 6 plus light orbs and 5 plus heart orbs. That's just very challenging to have. So that means you're going to have to stall or use active skills to overcome the floor. Now, anytime you stall, there's obviously some risk in dying. It could be player error, just hard hitting, or you're just forced to burn active skills. And if you burn active skills on a floor that you shouldn't be doing, it means later on floors are going to be more problematic because usually you tend to budget in your mind where you're going to use your active skills. And if you're forced to use them prematurely, it becomes challenging in longer content like Arena 3. Now, obviously, in shorter dungeons, you can blow through active skills and not really care, but when you start getting through the halfway point of Arena 3, it becomes harder to, say, conserve active skills and stall because those floors tend to be more lethal just because that's how the dungeon ramps up. So, in terms of consistency, Miru is obviously very consistent, but if you can clear floors without using active skills, that makes them more desirable, as well as that means you're stalling less later on and improving clear times. Now, if we are going to compare 2 leaders identical leaders in the sense that they have equal equal consistency clear rates, you're going to want to pick the one that is faster and less mentally taxing. Because when you start having to play a dungeon many times over and over again, you want to find the fastest route possible. If you have to, like I said, many players are playing Arena 3 repeatedly, and if you could save 10 or 15 minutes per clear, that's a great deal of time that you could put into, say, additional runs or even going outside into the real world. So, with all that being said, it's not to say that Miru is weak, it's just that these are points to consider that are making her less popular. The fact that she is orb hungry, active skill reliant, tough time hitting damage to a certain extent without those active skills, as well as not being able to overcome combo shields as easily. But with that being said, you should still really consider acquiring and farming a Miru on your own, because she's going to be relevant for for basically months, possibly even a year or so to come. Because right now, the only thing she can't really clear is Colosseum. Like, she can clear Colosseum, but it's not as ideal. So I believe that Arena 3 is going to be relevant, and Miru can still farm Arena 3, so it's worth pursuing. So, was Miru a bad idea? And in all honesty, I truly believe that Miru was actually one of the best cards and ideas released by Gung Ho in a very long time, because it gave players access to endgame content if you had the patience and perseverance to actually farm and invest in her. What was not a good idea was the fact that heart crosses were so overpowering that it made other types of leaders trivial by comparison. And when you combine the two, it's kind of hard to sometimes separate those two aspects when examining if Miru was bad. Because if they had tweaked the heart crosses more appropriately, Miru would be possibly more well received. Or if Miru wasn't necessarily a heart cross leader, but was capable of clearing just as much content, she'd probably be very well loved by comparison, because the heart crosses were not well received. So, what are my hopes for future farmable monsters? Well, Miru has definitely set the bar very high in terms of what farmable monsters can become, because not every card should be capable of clearing endgame content, and obviously they can't keep releasing cards that are so overpowering. They need to have balance, and I do want them to actually continue releasing powerful cards, because as of late, basically since Miru, they haven't really released any farmable monster that's really important to acquire. Like, they're nice and good and say have niche applications, but they're not necessarily mandatory like Miru was. Because outside of, say, Zero Infinity for those respective teams, Tengu for skill boost, and Zeus Dios for glorious button farming, you really don't need to farm any farmable monsters. And that is a problem, because we now lack goals, because now you might log in and think, oh, what do I want to play? Oh, I've beaten most dungeons, there's nothing to really play. I have to wait for Godfest, and my stone acquisition rate is slow, so then we don't really have these goals or something to strive towards. And it'd be nice if they did, because in an ideal world, in my head at least, I would like them to have at least farmable monsters that are powerful and viable in each color, because that way every player at least has a choice. Obviously you'll probably acquire all of them, but you'll at least have a way to basically round out or bolster your monster box in each aspect. And that's great to have in a game, because we want to obviously have incentive to log in and actually play, not just log in and collect the bonus. So, when making a farmable monster, we obviously should have some drawbacks, because we need to make them obviously at least have some limitations, or at least have less appeal than, say, a REM monster, because this is a company that wants to make money. So, you should make the new farmable monster dungeons challenging to acquire or invest in. So, with that, like, when Miru was first released, her dungeon was actually quite difficult. It had lots of interesting mechanics, lots of forced stallings, high damage requirements, it was a leveling up dungeon, and it was challenging for the average player to actually clear Miru and get the drop, and start investing and loving her. And I feel like that should be the same case for the next powerful farmable monster, make the dungeon hard and challenging. But to a certain extent, when you have solo and co-op mode, it's very hard to balance a dungeon around that in a feasible manner. And Gung Ho could start putting limitations. They could obviously hinder the benefits or perks that co-op offers, such as like a shared skill boost or extra active skills, or you could even completely exclude multiplayer mode and make the dungeon solo only. Obviously, I'd like them to have the reduced stamina cost, because then it doesn't feel as painful. But having it only acquirable in solo mode means there's no cheesy mechanics by comparison, because co-op can have much more cheese. And it also prevents carrying and players not being able to, basically, players that should not be able to beat a dungeon, beating the dungeon and acquiring a drop. So there's a certain degree of gatekeeping involved if you make it only solo mode. Conversely, they could also make it kind of like Orpharian's evolution tree, but that is probably a little extreme because maybe only 1% of the pad population has Orpharian, so it's just a frustrating experience trying to make Orpharian if you can't farm Colosseum. The next thing they should probably do is make it harder to use or slower compared to other high-end teams. Because like I already mentioned before, if you have two equally consistent teams, you're going to pick the faster one. So the farmable monster should obviously be slower in nature, and usually to make it slower, it has to be more challenging to activate. It could have a more challenging to activate leader skill in terms of, say, number of combos required or rainbow-esque style, but if you make it more challenging, you're going to be slower, which makes it at least less appealing than the REM equivalent, so those players who have those teams don't become unhappy knowing that a farmable monster can do their job better, because speed, to a certain extent, is better at this point in time. And you should still require rare machine cards as subs. Like, you can't have everything being farmable, that'd be great, but we obviously have some sort of appeal and allure of gambling with the rare machine, like a love-hate relationship, if you may. And Miru did really require REM cards. Like, yes, you can use Orpharian, but like I said, most people don't have Orpharian, so most people just simply filled her sub-roster of REM cards, and why can't the next farmable monster do the same? And last but not least, why not make it a guy? Like, I feel we mostly, or at least partially, play this game for the pretty girls. So if it's a guy, you don't feel as invalidated knowing that your waifu is not in danger. So, in conclusion, I truly believe that Miru was a good idea, that Gung-Ho actually released a powerful and viable monster that was farmable. What was not ideal or good was the fact that heart crosses were overpowered. And I honestly believe Gung-Ho really underestimated and made a blunder when designing the heart cross meta, because they can't go back and nerf a card. They can only move forward and accelerate power creep even faster. So, I'm obviously well aware that the goal of any company is to make money, but we do need to have continued incentives to play the game. For at least myself and possibly other players, there may not be very much to play. Like, I've cleared all the content right now, and what am I really striving and working towards? I have lots of plus eggs, I have enough Tamadras, I can basically, like, what am I trying to farm and play? Like, do I just grind rank? And a lot of people, I feel like, sometimes just maybe log in and collect the daily bonus, and that might be it. And that's not really good for the game, because the company really wants players to keep playing the game. And if you create strong and powerful farmable monsters to try and acquire, it makes people play more. And they get them excited to keep playing, so they'll probably play the game longer, buy more stones, and it's just healthy in the long run, because now we have goals in the game, as well as having some sort of, at least, framework or template to try and build towards when you're, say, mid-game. You at least have something to do. You're not as lost. You're like, oh, I need to acquire this monster, this monster, this monster. How am I going to work towards it? What tools do I have? And that would make it more exciting, because I have been actually playing a bit of other mobile games as of late, and I can definitely see the differences. That pad is very grindy. Obviously, I'm not endgame in those ones by comparison, but they have daily quests and daily rewards that keep you wanting to play, at least log in and not just touch the login bonus. You want to just play the game to reap those benefits and rewards. And they do at least have farmable monsters to acquire that seem powerful, at least in my limited capacity to understand the game. And pads should do the same, in my opinion. So, let me know what you think about farmable monsters moving forward in the future, and whether or not Miru was a good or bad idea in the comments below. Hopefully you all have a mantastic evening, and happy puzzling!